everyone, and thank you for joining this Public Transportation Division's Coordinated Call for Projects webinar. My name is Gonzalo Ponce. I am the Program Manager for the Road Discretionary and Intercity Bus programs, and I will be your host for today's webinar. So on the agenda, we have a few items that this will probably be the only slide that I'll read to you word for word. I promise. At least try to. But some of the topics that we'll be covering today include not only the programs but also a timeline of events and activities and those milestones within that timeline, as well as the purpose or the main purpose of this webinar is the application instructions, as far as doing a nice drill down into the guidance that's provided and so forth. And then with some important notes and what I call points of emphasis. Not only during the presentation I'll have points of emphasis, but also within the instructions themselves. There are some points of emphasis and maybe a few changes from the last coordinated call. I won't get too much into the differences, but I will at least emphasize the main differences. And we'll talk a little bit about e-grants. This is not a e-grants 101 or e-grants navigational webinar, but I'll go ahead and touch on it. And then we'll have our Q&A, questions and answers session, and then I'll leave the resources slide up for everyone. And one of the questions that typically comes up is that whether this presentation is going to be available after the webinar. And the answer is yes. Not only is the video going to be available for this webinar, but the PowerPoint itself will be available as well. So if you are here for RD, Road Discretionary, RD, and Intercity Bus ICB applications, you're at the right webinar. RD is defined as follows. It is to assist public transportation providers in rural areas to provide passenger transportation services to the general public using the most efficient combination of knowledge, materials, resources, and technology. Road discretionary funds are available for this call for projects which cannot reasonably be funded through FTA and state program formula allocations or local resources and are consistent with identified objectives. ICB is described as follows. It supports connections, services, and infrastructure to meet the intercity mobility needs of residents in rural areas. Once again, consistent with identified objectives. So the scope of each program is identified on page 4 of the application instructions, which we'll take a look at. Any proposed project submitted must meet the scope identified in the application instructions. I have this slide up here. I highlighted the 2 programs we're covering today, and as you can see, there's several other programs that encompass the coordinated call. And some of you may have attended some of those webinars. They've been conducted already. So this diagram, it illustrates the timeline with major milestones along the way, reading it from left to right, of course. This is essentially a "you are here" diagram, or a roadmap, so to speak. So today's November 21st. As you can see, there's there are some dates, but also some milestones that are color coded in red. Those are the real nicely important dates. This is also the 10,000-foot view of the coordinated call process from a visual representation of the scheduled milestones. So milestone, this table right here outlines the target milestones from the timeline in the previous slide. Draw an emphasis as another reminder that the applications are due on Valentine's Day, 2020 or February 14, 2020. We would love to get all your applications on time. Yes, pun intended. So all applications must be in the status application submitted for review in eGrants in order to be considered for funding. All applications are due in eGrants at 5 p.m. Central Standard Time, February 14, 2020. Did I mention that the applications are due February 14, 2020? Obviously, rhetorical questions since all the phones are muted. And I highlighted that date as well as a point of emphasis. As you can see, future dates in terms of the commission approval and when we anticipate the PGAs to be distributed, 8-1, with an execution of 9-1. This slide is a little busy, but I'll break it down. It's actually the excerpt of the table of contents. So the slide outlines the table of contents of the application instruction, and I wanted to make it available to you for your convenience. So I encourage you to read the entire call for projects. This will help ensure you apply for the correct program or programs. So I went ahead and highlighted in yellow sections 1 through 4 because this applies to all applications. So I won't get too much into details in those 4 sections, but I'll go ahead and just give you some general information. And one of them that doesn't show up is section 4, which is the matrix for funding choices, which we'll touch on. But you can use the matrix to look up which possible funding categories you may be eligible for based on your organization type. So basically cruising down the table of contents, if you look at the section 2, terms and conditions, essentially it goes over multiple items, including selection of projects, negotiations, award, and obligations. So just touching on a few items here. Section 3, the development. That section goes over the eGrants and training and guidance and where to submit your questions. And of course, getting started, it nicely outlines the steps and the actions needed for getting started on the grant application. See section 4. It gives you instructions regarding how to complete the application information form, any grants, and other relevant information. So coming down to section 5, programs, which we'll be covering. I only included the 2 programs that are being discussed in this webinar. That's ROAD, of course, RD, ICB. In section 5 for the program, it goes over the scope, objectives, and program requirements and evaluation criteria for each program. Section 6 is a glossary. It basically outlines common terms and definitions used in a document or throughout the document. And section 7, attachments. And this is these attachments. This is a fairly new section actually that we provide a transit facility pipeline, which gives the different phases of a project from planning and scoping through the construction, as well as a vehicle life standards table. So you have 2 nice pieces of sources there to reference. The pipeline is a visual diagram, of course, and then the vehicle life standards table is a table. So as far as important notes go, I wanted to capture just a few things to note about the coordinated call process from a very high level point of view. It is a call that is distributed biannually, every 2 years. Next call for projects, as you can see there, is fall of 2021. I won't read everything in the slide, but I mean, one thing to note is the maximum number of years, which is 2, starting in either FY21 or 22. The points of emphasis slide. So this is the second coordinated call for projects, which is submitted at eGrants, which of course is our system of record. If you're already set up in eGrants, you should see the opportunities for these programs. Otherwise, as an organization, you'll want to contact the PTN eGrants Help Desk. The Help Desk information is located on the resources side of this presentation. However, as an individual, if you don't have access to eGrants, you want to contact your agency's systems administrator. They can set you up, or at least request a user ID. They can set you up with that. See, as for guidance that's provided in blue text throughout the document, we do ask, and we're getting ready to actually go into the actual instructions themselves, but you might hear me repeat this, but please, we ask to not copy and paste the guidance as part of your response, or just simply make it your response. It's guidance. You'll see when we get there. Essentially, the guidance further expands the specific question it is addressing. Sort of when we ask this question, this is what we mean, and here are some examples. So let me see what's my next slide. Budget milestones form, which we'll take a look at here in the next few minutes, is guidance given for the budget milestones page for each program, and of course it's in section 5. We ask that you please pay careful attention to the guidance given. Some programs only allow specific LIs, which are identified in the guidance. And on here, on this slide here, you'll see there are some general points to note. Namely, indirect costs. It's not going to be considered allowed if it's not indicated at the time of the application. And as a gentle reminder, indirect costs are not allowed for intercity bus, for ICB. I won't read the slide to you, but if anyone has any questions on in-kind, requesting funding and so forth, I would save it for the chat. But I will point out the application. For the applications requesting funding for more than 1 year, and we ask everyone to enter only the first year of funds requested on the budget milestones page, not the entire 2 years, but just your first year budget. And everyone is asked to attach the multi-year budget worksheet, which comes in the form of an Excel spreadsheet. We ask that please leave the form, the workbook, in its original Microsoft Excel format. In other words, you don't have to PDF it or, I guess, convert it to a Word or anything else. Just please leave it in its original state. And TDCs will be available by going into the budget milestones page and clicking on the TDC requested checkbox. So with that in mind, I'd like to dive right into the instructions. So give me a second here and I'll pull it up. So jumping straight into rural discretionary, one of the things I wanted to point out is the forms, or the online forms, or the pages. Rural discretionary and intercity bus are very similar. So what I'm going to do is talk in detail on the forms in rural discretionary, and then emphasize the ones that are ICB specific once we cross that bridge. And if anybody has any questions on the objectives, or I'm going to scroll through here, the eligible activities. Sorry. Please ask your questions during the Q&A session, because there's a lot to cover here, and I want to make sure that give you as much information as I can on the guidance side as opposed to the general information. But if you don't have, I realize this is not necessarily an exhaustive list, but if it's not listed here in terms of an eligible activity, you're still welcome to ask the question and see. We can make that determination. The eligible assistance categories, there are several categories, and this table nicely outlines them nicely, from local administrative expenses, capital expenses. I won't read all of these to you in the interest of time. Everyone should have a copy. Have a copy of these instructions. If you haven't gotten your hands on them, everything's posted on the TxDOT's or TxDOT-PTN's website. Not only the instructions. Eventually, we'll post this presentation. We'll post the PowerPoint, and we will post the questions. Funding percentages, once again, sorry about that. Based on project types and the funding percentages, this gives you a nice breakdown. Any questions on this, please feel free to ask. That was too fast, sorry about that. All right, evaluation criteria. And as a gentle reminder, these instructions actually mirror the what is in the e-grants. So we are taking what's in the e-grants and breaking it down with, I guess, more or less, but by providing guidance for each individual form, each individual field. And also the instructions follow the same flow as it does in e-grants. So there's no jumping around. You start at the top when it comes to your forms, and you work your way down. These instructions will follow. They follow that flow nicely. Okay, so I won't cover question number 1 and 2 in detail, but I'd like to point out that question 3, and for those who may have applied in the past or did apply in the past, you probably see a little bit of a difference between last time and this time around, and obviously you would see that difference in e-grant. So question number 3 asks everyone to provide a clear and concise project goals and describe the associated objectives of each goal. So the guidance below that is that we define what are project goals, and it's an individual project goal or a desired outcome. So I realize it says project goals plural. If you only have a singular goal, you can put that in there. Every time you enter a goal and an associated objective and you save it, eGrants will create a subsequent row for you to fill out. So the objectives, we ask that you provide specific, measurable, and actions that are going to be taken to meet that goal. So question number 4. In the table here, we ask that you provide tasks and deliverables that's going to help you achieve the objectives identified in the previous question, identified above. And we define what an objective is, once again. In the tasks, we're looking for the objective, the task to fulfill that, but also the deliverables based on each task. And hopefully, you know, we did a good job of identifying what an objective, a task, and a deliverable is. And if you have questions, feel free to ask. These are the same questions from last time around in terms of identifying your goal, the 5-year plan goal, priority or objective, how the project relates. This time around, we just went ahead and broke it out into a 2-column table and defined what to enter in each field from a goal, priority, or objective standpoint, and also how the project relates to the 5-year plan, goal, or objective. Project implementation. I'm going to go ahead and just cover once again, you're going to hear me say this again, points of emphasis in the instructions. Because everything else in terms of guidance, once again, we're stating that when we ask this question, this is what we mean, but also we expand on that and try to provide some examples where appropriate of what it means when we ask that question, or yes. So number 3, it asks to describe any other fund sources that are going to be used to plan, initiate, or implement or sustain a project. There's a whole lot of guidance here. I'll narrow it down to providing a funding source, an amount, and duration of availability of those funds. And in the guidance here, we went ahead and provided an example of what needs to be, or specifically what we're looking for in terms of support. And in this case, you have letters of commitment from other organizations or entities. A letter of commitment, and we define what that is. It is as opposed to just simply a letter of support. It's a letter of commitment. Of course, we ask for letters to be signed by an individual who's fully authorized to do so. This is a question from the previous coordinate cause in terms of how the agency has or will coordinate with the RCTP, Regionally Coordinated Transportation Planning, the lead agency or agencies in the area. Our guidance is to please provide a timeline of events or coordination. So when we ask to provide a timeline, you're welcome to plug in some dates into this field. And we're not, I realize it says 0 to 4,000 characters. You don't necessarily have to fill the entire field with all the characters or text. A lot of these that ask, particularly for a timeline or events or what have you, you can actually put a summary here and attach a detail, more detail of the timeline. It'll save you a lot of typing if you provide a summary here. Okay, roles and responsibilities of stakeholders. We ask here to identify stakeholders that are involved in the development of the project using a timeline once again. So in a nutshell, we're asking for not only the names of the organizations who are going to participate in the development of the project, we're essentially asking who will contribute to the project, identifying those individuals by name, title, and so forth. So who's going to actually contribute to the project, to the development of it, but as well as will contribute to the overall success of the project, depending on what phase or what stage of the project you're in. Question 2, we're restating that we need actual letters of commitment. Oops, sorry about that. Got a new laptop and this mouse is very sensitive. I'm going to go ahead and scroll through the experience and capacity. Those are essentially, once again, general questions. Excuse me. Under project evaluation, there are 3 fields that you're going to be able to attach your letters of commitment or letters of support or any other attachments that's appropriate. So you can use this section here, use this form to go ahead and attach any documents that may have been called elsewhere within the application itself that's without a designated upload field. Please go ahead and use this field here, and eGrant should also once you upload a document, eGrant should provide a second. It should add a second field for you to attach any subsequent or upload any subsequent attachments. Facility-specific evaluation questions here. If you answer no to this question, you will see these questions at all. So if you answer yes, you are going to get a slew of questions. We went ahead and changed the formatting a little bit to try to capture the phase, the activities, costs, and dates or timeframes, and we went ahead and defined what those mean by phase, activities, costs, and dates or timeframes. For the phases, we're asking for your agency or your internally defined phases of the project. However you entitle those, whatever methodology you use, we ask you to please put it here. If you answered yes to the question, once again, we ask you to identify the phases below using the checkbox. If you select the C, D, or E above, as you can see in the instructions, we ask for a categorical exclusion worksheet. And you can reference the attachment A, which is at the end of the document for the transit pipeline facility, and just which will use that as a guide to help you select the appropriate phase. Same as last time, where we asked for agencies to identify completed phases to this point. So if you answered yes at the top, but if the question here says identify completed phases, if you don't have any completed phases at this point, you can just put in I realize it's not in here in the guidance, but go ahead and type in NA, and NA will be is an acceptable response. Otherwise, we define what the phase, the activities which will take place, the cost, and the funding source below for you. Question 3B, any activities that are currently in progress? Of course, this is not an NA response if you do have activities in progress. And here we ask for not only the phase activities in progress cost funding source, we also ask for the amount that has been committed. And we define what that means, which is what funds, so the amount of funds committed to date for the project. And of course, 3C is the future state in terms of future activities. That is broken out once again by phase, activities in progress, the cost, the funding source, the amount of funds that have been committed, and then the amount requested. We define the amount committed as committed for what's called a project, and the amount requested, we ask you to put the amount of funds being requested for this called project in that field. You want to, once you save your first phase, eGrants will create a subsequent row for you to fill out your subsequent phases. So you can outline all your phases here of your project. I mean, we ask you to outline all your phases. That's why we're capturing this in a row format, so it gives us a snapshot of all the project phases, whether they're in progress or future. So question number 4, if there's a facility location, if it's available, if you have an address, that's fine. If you do not have an address, we went ahead and attached some instructions, tutorials on how to capture a location in Google Maps. If you're having any challenges with going into the Google Map tutorials, because you have to create a login. One of the things you can do is go to Google Maps, and then you can go ahead and expand it, and you can actually right-click in any given area, or in the area that you anticipate the area of the facility, and select what's there or what's here. What that does is it pinpoints it creates a little pin, but also it gives you the longitude and latitude of that location. That might be the simpler route to take, because then you can copy paste those longitude and latitude coordinates into Google Maps, and it will create a map for you, and you can just do a screenshot at that point. But we do ask for information such as clearly marked and legibly labeled. If you're able to get a satellite view, or if you're able to get a photograph of the location or the area, even better. Budget milestones, this is pretty self-explanatory. I won't spend too much time here. I touched on the TDC requested, however, that if you check that box, you're essentially stating that you're requesting TDCs. When filling out the budget milestones page, when it comes to the milestones, at the very least, we ask for a contract end date, contract completion date, estimated contract completion date. Intercity bus. So a lot of these questions are going to be the same. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll down to the intercity bus specific questions or guidance. Everything else is, once again, it's pretty self-explanatory unless you have further questions or you need us to expand on anything. Roles and responsibilities, the same, experience and capacity. Okay, for the project evaluation, I went ahead and highlighted the, I realize we're in the ICB section, but I wanted to highlight the point of emphasis in terms of the guidance here, where it's saying that transit entities requesting funds for feeder service routes and facility projects must include at least one letter of commitment from an ICB carrier, which states the ICB carrier's actual future commitment to the project. We also ask for letters of endorsement for the ICB agency. It should be from a corporate office and not local staff. And then for-profit ICB carriers, there's a nice outline here of the items that should be provided. Transit entities, as far as requesting funds for operating assistance for interlining feeder services, the requirement here is to attach a current Federal Operating Authority certification. So this specific evaluation, it's a lot of the same questions from road discretionary. Same thing with maps. Operating assistance. If you say yes to the answer yes to this question, the guidance here is that we ask you to not only provide route name description, but also, if you can, when you're doing so, try using the naming convention, or please use the naming convention where you have a route number, a departure location, and destination location. And here we provide a definition of what this is point of emphasis, what a new route is. It's defined as never having been in service or not been in service in the prior year. So existing routes are defined as routes that have been in service even if they have been modified. If you need help with to determine whether this is a feeder service route, please, we ask you to reference the FDA circular. Question 4, multiple routes are submitted, rank each in priority order. Provide the numerical value for each ranking order, I guess, from 1 being the highest to whatever number being the lowest. Question 7, we went ahead and broke this out on a table, try to make it easier for, I guess, capturing the data. So we ask here, insert the amount of funds awarded in the past 3 years. Those are fiscal years, of course, and then enter the amount. And then insert the amount. Question 8, the total amount of operating funds requested. Question 9, how many years has this route received operating assistance? We define it as it pertains to the number of years versus the number of awards that we receive from TxDOT. Question 10, here we ask that when we ask the question if this route has received operating assistance for more than 2 years, describe how the route has shown improvements. Our guidance there is to attach a support documentation that contains performance data or that demonstrates measurable and tangible improvements. If there are no improvements, please, we ask provide steps or actions taken to make the route profitable. And when do you forecast this route, the route not needing assistance? The guidance there is give us a forecast, best guess when you anticipate the route not needing assistance or becoming self-sufficient. Please provide a timeline or roadmap of activities that will take place to lead this route to no longer needing assistance. So when filling out the ridership data for the last 3 years, if applicable, of course, there's 2 additional questions go ahead and highlight them actually. For this coordinated call, we're asking for a cost per passenger and cost per mile. The cost per passenger is defined, of course, as expenses divided by your yearly passenger count. Cost per mile is expenses divided by your total miles. So we'll be asking that at the front end during this coordinated call. Okay. Give me a moment. I'll bring the presentation back up, please. Budget milestones. I think we covered pretty much what we're looking for there in terms of the not only the milestone dates, but also the multi-year budget worksheet. One of the things that I failed to point out that the when it comes to capturing or adding your routes, you'll want to, once you enter your first one, you want to click on your click on the add button in eGrants, and it would open up a new form. So each route gets its own form, its own page basically. So once you've filled everything out, you'll see a drop down, and it'll list out all your routes for you. But it's important to note that click that add button. So at this point, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to use the chat feature, and I will answer the question if I'm not able to answer it at this time, since we are at the end of unfortunately, we're at the end of the webinar. Barring any more fire alarms, if anybody has any questions, let's go ahead and get those through here. So I got a question here. If your project involves construction of a facility with elements that could fall into multiple funding categories, RDICB, will the applicant be allowed to indicate multiple funding strategies at the time of submission? Let's see. The way I read that question is, if you're applying for RD and you're applying for ICB, can you reference your RD funding as a funding source?
You know, my thought on that would be yes, you could reference it, but you need to make it clear that it's being requested and it's not already received. So if you're requesting funds under both rural discretionary and intercity bus, you would make it clear on each one that you're requesting funds from the other source as well.
Hopefully that answers your question. The next one is, are the indirect costs allowed for rural discretionary? The answer is yes. I think we have time for maybe one more question since we've gone over a lot of time. But let me see what's come through. For ICB funds, will TDCs be available for operating expenses?
Typically, TDCs are not available for operating. I think that's why we're both looking at each other kind of funny. Yeah, typically TDCs are for capital projects.
Right. Last question, is this the same discretionary funds that we have previously received without applying, previously called vehicle miles funds? No, this is a competitive process. It's not a formula process, because vehicle miles are typically formula 5311 funds.
And those are not discretionary.
Right. Those are not discretionary. Okay, well, I'd like to thank everyone for attending this webinar. Apologize for the interruption. And if you have any other questions, please use let me do this for you. The resource slide. If you have any clarification of specifications for this called projects, you can contact PTN via the program management at TxDOT.gov email. Questions regarding the e-grant system or to set up e-grants, contact the help desk. If you have any questions in terms of responses to the questions, I'm sorry, let me back up. TxDOT responses to the written questions will be posted on the PTN's website, as I mentioned earlier, and the link is here. We encourage you to check the website periodically for updates. All questions are due by January 3rd, 2020, and we're going to go ahead and develop a final Q&A document that's going to be posted at the PTN website the following week. Thank you again for attending this webinar.